Section 3, forming the disaster relief team. So we're going to talk a little bit about creating a nonprofit organization. We're not going to go too deep down that path, but we're going to talk about the importance of that. And then we'll talk about team structuring and team training, personal skills. And then inside of personal skills, a big portion of this section is about psychological first aid. Don't worry about digging in your study guide trying to find that. You're not going to find that. I didn't put all the psychological first aid into the study guide. I'd like to say there's some really great reason for me not doing that, except for the fact that I decided after I created the study guide that I wanted to include the psychological first aid. So that's not going to be in there, but there's going to be a lot we're going to talk about with regards to that. So forming disaster relief team. So far, I think the first half of this course today, we've talked about, I really wanted to give you guys a background, how emergency preparedness works, how emergency response structure in the United States is set up, the disaster cycle, kind of really lay a foundation for you guys before we got into really forming the disaster relief ministry team. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about creating, like I said, structuring the team. First thing is, you want to be if you're going to go in and meld into an incident command structure at the scene of a disaster, you need to be a legitimate entity. You can do that by being under the covering of your church. If your church wanted to have kind of an extension of itself in the community in the form of a disaster relief team, you can do that. But typically, if not, then you'll need to create that legal entity in order to be recognized by the government. So, a lot of disaster relief organizations, they handle money, okay? Because one of the greatest needs after disaster for survivors and victims is just that. It's money. It's They've got to reacquire the things that they need to live, right? So that takes money. And we're going to talk a little bit about donation management as well, because donation management is huge in a disaster relief scenario. But you need to be a legal entity. The organization needs to be a legal entity established with the IRS, because you're handling money and you're redistributing money. And so you are answerable to the federal government for that. So making you recognizable to government agencies at the scene of the disaster, answer to the federal government with regards to handling donations. And then also, one great thing about being a nonprofit organization, 501c3, is that you have the ability to also receive government grant funds as long as it aligns with your mission, your organization's mission. You can apply to receive government grant funds that can assist your mission as well. So what is needed? Basically, you need an organization name. The legal entity's got to be created and on file with the IRS. And then also, depending on what state you live in, you need to be set up with the Department of State or, let's see, I think you can register with the tax office as well in your jurisdiction where you live. So being 501c3 designated is really important. So when you're talking about the structure of a nonprofit organization, this also goes back to a church. You need to have a board of directors, okay? It's good, you don't have to, but it's good to have what we call bylaws. Bylaws are established by the board during the time of the organization being formed, and they basically spell out, this is how we're going to handle these situations if they occur. And it's kind of like a standard operating guidelines for the organization. It can really save you legally down the line if something were to occur. You can refer back to that as your policies. There's a lot of goobity gush right here with a lot of information. Again, just know that bylaws are basically the standard operating guidelines for the organization, and they're very important. And if something were to occur down the line, you would need to refer back to those to protect yourself legally. So when you're creating a nonprofit organization, like I said, you want to come up with organization name. You want to be registered and become a legal entity. And then you want to have a board of directors. But the very first thing to do is ask yourself, why are we creating this organization? So you must have a mission and a vision. The mission and vision, they are spelled out in the bylaws, and everyone understands what our goals are. So obviously it's hard to achieve goals if you don't know what they are, right? So it communicates the nonprofit's purpose, what it hopes to serve, and how it plans to do that. For a new nonprofit, developing the mission statement should be one of the very first things you do, and it will guide the organization going forward. In a church, the executive director is typically the pastor of the church. This is the figurehead for the church. They guide the daily operations. They carry the vision of the organization. But in a traditional nonprofit organization outside of the church, that person is usually called an executive director. Okay. You always do need to have some type of a secretary, and a lot of churches have these as well. This person ensures the organization remains fiscally responsible, and keeps everything intact with regards to handling of any kind of money. Board of directors also is basically, these are the group of individuals that the executive director answers to. They also ensure that the organization is being effective in meeting the goals that were established in the mission and vision, and that all actions are appropriate. Okay. Depending on how big your organization is, you may have other paid staff as well that do various other things. But critical are executive director, secretary, and board of directors to the organization. The real hands and feet of the organization in most VOADs is your volunteers. That's why it's a volunteer organization. Yeah, paid staff can do some stuff, and these other guys can do some things, but it's your volunteer. They are the workforce of your organization. In the event of a disaster, you're going to call all these folks up. They're volunteering their time to carry out that mission, and they really are the hands and feet of the organization. So these are some titles within the disaster relief team. So when you're talking about the structure of a disaster relief team, we're going to develop this team. This team is going to get trained. We're going to think all hazards, right? Because we don't know what kind of disasters we may get called to respond to. So we're going to plan all hazards. We're going to train ourselves the best we know how to be prepared for those, so that when we go in, we're not adding an extra burden to the already existing disaster. Instead, we're relieving burden. We're helping the first responders by taking off some of the weight off their shoulders. We're helping to feed people. And a lot of what we're providing is not only to the survivors or victims of the disaster, but it's also to the first responders. We're probably going to feed first responders as well. We're going to provide emotional support to them as well. So within your disaster relief team structure, remember, at incident command, the incident commander is always in charge. There's always an incident commander, no matter if it's a one-person team or it's a 500,000 person team. There's always an incident commander. Well, within our disaster relief team, that person is called the task force commander, okay? Because disaster relief team is just that. It's a task force of individuals going in to accomplish peace within that incident command situation. So within that, we have a liaison person. This person represents the disaster relief team. So let's just, for example, let's just say we have a team called Integrity Disaster Relief, and we're going into a disaster situation. Our liaison is that individual that will coordinate with the other agencies on scene to represent us. So the task force commander, they'll basically be the mouthpiece for the task force commander. They'll coordinate with the other agencies. They'll bring word back to Integrity Relief Team to say, this is what's going on, this is the situation. And basically they are that intermediary between the disaster relief team and the other operations at the scene. Okay? Then your mass care supervisor. Mass care is a term we're also going to talk about in just a few moments. Mass care basically means coordination of food, shelter, clean drinking water, things like that. Force protection. Force protection is a term that basically means you're providing first aid and emergency care for the first responders if something were to happen. Another leader within the disaster relief team is the donation team leader. This person is responsible for all donation management, which is a huge undertaking. So you want to make sure this person has a good understanding of the laws, the legal aspects to handling money, because when you take money from other individuals and you redistribute it, you need to make sure you have an understanding of the requirements within that and that everything is handled appropriately. Debris removal team leader. So you can go on and on. Spiritual team leader is very critical. And depending on what type of a disaster it is, you can change that team leader's title. And it's not to say that the spiritual team leader may not also be the donation team leader as well. That can be the same person. Does that make sense? But all the team leaders will report up to the task force commander. Any questions about that? Okay. It's all about knowing who do I report to. Structure is really important. Chain of command is really important. Knowing who's in charge is really important, and the reason why is because when people start going off doing their own things, it's not as effective, it's not as productive, and we don't achieve our goals in a timely fashion. It's very important that the disaster relief team at all times, when deployed, meaning leaving home station, from the time you hit the road, deploying to the location you're going, or you're going by plane or whatever it is, that you need to be recognizable and identifiable, especially at the scene of the disaster. Everyone needs to know who you are and why you're there. You can do that by wearing specific vests. You decide within the team how you want to identify yourselves. There's never a question when you're at a scene of a disaster anywhere in the world who the Red Cross person is there? We all know. They always have a Red Cross on them or a Red Crescent or whatever that is. You know who they are and what they do. They provide disaster relief and mass care and things like that. So it's very important that you determine what that's going to be. Team Rubicon is a really neat VOAD, and this is kind of one of their teams deploying and helping out with debris removal. But they like to dress tactical. They like to wear like tactical pants and boots, and then they have their T-shirts that identify that they're Team Rubicon. It's just one of many examples. Okay. Also with that, if you have trailers or vehicles, you can put logos and things on those as well. When you come to the scene of the disaster, it's going to make it easier because most disaster scenes, well, a lot of disaster scenes there's a cordon around them, and they are secured. So once you're established within that structure and they know who the organization is, it's going to make it a lot easier for you to come and go. If you're easily identifiable, you're wearing, they can tell by looking at you or by your vehicle who you belong with. Okay? So before we go, we want to make sure that our team members have the right skills, the right personal skills. Again, we don't want to show up at the scene of the disaster and just add to the burden. Now we're somebody else you got to take care of, you know. We want to come there and we want to take burden off of the first responders, and we want to add value. We want to help the survivors. So every team member is going to need to be provided pertinent training before they leave to go on a disaster deployment. One thing in emergency management that we always say is, don't wait to exchange business cards at the scene of a disaster, right? We'll talk about resource management in just a little bit. Number one important thing of resource management is relationships. And that comes across all aspects of emergency management. Your relationships are going to be the most critical, most helpful to you in the event of a disaster. So if you're on the debris removal team, for example, you'll need to know how to operate a chainsaw safely. When you use a chainsaw, what kind of personal protective equipment should you wear? Eye protection, gloves, steel-toe boots, things like that. Inside of the world of disaster response, they follow OSHA guidelines and things like that for safety. So we need to understand what those are. We don't want to go out there and be wearing tennis shoes and a t-shirt and have no gloves. Here, I got my chainsaw, I'm about to help out. No, you're not. We don't need another victim of the scene of the disaster. So we need to understand proper PPE to wear, understand how to operate the equipment that we're going to be working with, if we're going to be working with equipment. Just an example of things like that. And then once our team is trained in all these different areas, so we want to have that initial orientation training that says once you complete this orientation, you are now a trained team member. But oh, by the way, and maybe it's annually or maybe it's every other year, we need a refresher training to keep your skills up. Okay, we can do internal drills. We can practice our skills as well. Also very important. And then another thing is cross-train as often as possible. Obviously, everybody on the team should be able to be on the spiritual team, right? If you're going in, you're representing a faith-based organization, you're going into the scene of disaster, everyone needs emotional assistance and prayer. So everyone needs to be able to fill that role. But cross-train, be able to receive all the training, be able to be on any team. There's no reason not to do that. Disaster scenes are ever-changing. You may be coming out of the response phase into the recovery phase of a disaster and the need suddenly changes. Now we've got plenty of food, or we've got plenty of jackets, or whatever it is, and now the need is emotional care, or now the need is rebuilding. So let's try and cross-train as many people as possible. So here in just a moment, we're about to go into talking about psychological first aid. This really falls under that spiritual team member category of personal skills. There is an entire area of emergency management called disaster behavioral health. So it's exactly what it sounds like. It's basically the provision of mental health, substance abuse, and stress management services to disaster survivors and also responders. So does anybody think that there's a lot of stress involved in a disaster? If you're the guy or gal showing up to save somebody, you're also experiencing a lot of stress, aren't you? To think that you're not going to be impacted by that is somewhat ignorant, because it's impossible to experience something like that and not be affected by it mentally to some extent. So the entire category of disaster behavioral health talks about that. So being on the spiritual team, so first of all, anyone can listen. Is talking more important than listening? It is never more important than listening, especially not when someone has just been traumatized, okay? One of the best things you can do to help a victim is to just simply listen. You don't need to say, I understand. Okay, that's not going to help. Just listen. Anyone can pray. Pray with them. Pray with them about their immediate needs. Anything that they request that you pray with them about. Anyone can do that. That huge critical need in a disaster cannot be understated, how important emotional care and spiritual care is. But be prepared for what you might encounter. We talked a little bit, like I said earlier, we talked a little bit about mass fatalities in a lot of these incidents. How many people, just a raise of hands, have you ever watched anyone die? So more than half of you, most of you. So to you, it may not be, it's still going to be tragic, right? No matter what the event is, it's always tragic. But be prepared for what you may encounter, because we're going to need to provide emotional care, and so we got to watch each other as well. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. I'm sorry, I'm hoping this is the very last video, but I do want you to see this. I believe this is the Samaritan's Purse, but it shows a faith-based organization in action, and I'll provide a little more context.
We came out of that circle that I saw, and I just started sitting in it.
Water just coming in like
Samaritan's Purse churches have come up and they've done so much that you can't feel sorry for yourself. The blessings of God are just overflowing.
This disaster was able to bring Christ so that maybe would have never had the opportunity to hear that before.
It opened up doors in our community church that would have been impossible. They said, we would like to talk to you about hosting Samaritan's Favorite Church. We'll bring in everything that's needed. So we said, let's do it.
Samaritan's Purse could not do the things that we do without good host churches that are willing to open up their facility and to house volunteers, to feed volunteers, and to be that base of operations for a disaster.
Called us a lighthouse church. And that was a church that was housing people from Samaritan's Purse so they could begin to do their work. And what an awesome responsibility that was.
Being a lighthouse church is incredibly important. People know they can go, they know they can get help, they know they can receive help.
Partnering with Samaritan's Purse, we were empowered to really be the hands and feet of Jesus.
I think any church would be blessed to have that ability to go out and people in their need right then.
Made our church someplace that was shined throughout the community.
I put on Facebook that God said He'd say so. God is good, and these people are angels.
If it wouldn't been for the volunteers and Samaritan's Purse, giving us supplies and stuff to try to help clean up, I don't think we would have made it this far.
And so the partnership with this local church, that's important. But also, we need lighthouse churches that send volunteers, churches that catch the vision, and maybe they wouldn't be one that would host us, but maybe they could send a group of volunteers. We need those churches that would say, I can put a team together, and I can send a group down to do disaster.
Samaritan's Purse actually making our job easy here to be the hands and feet of Jesus and to really go out and make a big impact.
To see a sea of orange just flowing throughout the community was amazing.
Only God can take a disaster and turn it into something amazing.
It's not us. It doesn't matter what we have to give. God can pour that strength through us and use us if we're just available.
Bless you. Bless you. Thank you guys so much for your help. Oh my goodness, you're welcome.
We have to have those local churches that catch that vision, who have a heart for reaching their community. But the important thing, too, is that we find a church that the Samaritan's Purse pulls out of the parking lot, that the ministry doesn't stop there.
We still know that we have support from Samaritan's Purse, and we're just going to pick up, continue the same work that was already started here even before Samaritan's Purse got here.
Here in this deployment, we've had over 70 folks that have come to know Christ, and we want to find a church that's going to disciple those.
We experienced probably the greatest surge of attendance on the weekend and membership that we've ever had in our history after the flood.
There's a lot of work still yet to be done, but after Samaritan's Purse pulls out, the work will still continue, and we'll be grateful for what was done.
There were several key families that are members of our church now that had no idea anything about Promised Land or God at all before the flood.
It was such a beautiful experience. It was almost a little bit sad when everybody packed up and left.
Our relationship with Samaritan's Purse has been awesome. We had the same statement of faith. We had the same beliefs. We had the same focus on the gospel, giving God the glory for what He's done. Just to know that you're working with people who do give God all the glory, that's been an incredible joy for us.
So that video was obviously geared to churches that may be interested in assisting or becoming partners with Samaritan's Purse, but I think it illustrated pretty well faith-based DRT in action and kind of the impact they can make on a local church and local community. So I just wanted to show you guys that. Okay, we are going to talk a little bit about psychological first aid. How are we doing on time? 1:30. Okay, we still got a little. Okay, 20 minutes. Okay, we'll get some of this done before break. So psychological first aid, it's a technique designed to reduce the occurrence of post-traumatic stress disorder. Does everybody know what PTSD is? When we think about PTSD, a lot of us think about former soldiers and individuals that have served in the military and seen things and experienced things that now that they're later on, it's impacting them emotionally and they're going through things. PTSD, it can impact anyone that's experienced any type of trauma. It doesn't matter if you were in a car accident, if you were abused as a child, the list goes on and on and on. PTSD is very real and it manifests in a lot of ways. So this really is just a technique, psychological first aid. It's a technique of reaching those people in that moment of trauma. It is recognized by the World Health Organization, the CDC, all levels of government as being an effective technique, by the way. It is used parallel to medical first aid. It's now considered to be that critical. Used to, emotional well-being was an afterthought. Now it's being considered just as important as immediate medical care, physical medical care. You only need to use skills that you probably already have to administer psychological first aid. It's not designed for use in the immediate aftermath of a disaster. Beyond that, later on down the road, they'll need to see a pastor or counselor or someone else to help continue their treatment. But it offers practical assistance and information to the individuals as well. So who delivers it? That would be first responder teams, second responder teams, community emergency response teams. That would be you guys. If you deploy as a DRT, you would and could definitely deliver psychological first aid. It can be used at the Family Assistance Center, at the scene of the disaster, weeks later. Depending on the type of disaster, the response phase sometimes can be very short, and sometimes it can last for weeks, right? And it is an integral part of the disaster response. So the psychological versus medical footprint in a disaster, the size of the psychological footprint usually far exceeds the medical footprint. We talked about after the West explosion, families experiencing cascading effects because of the change in their lives for many years to come. We look at that footprint. It's much wider than the physical medical footprint. So, and the thing here really is stress. Because we all know, we all experience stress. I think there's some healthy level of stress, and then there's unhealthy levels of stress, right? And in an event of a disaster, you're almost always experiencing very unhealthy levels of stress. So how do people react to that? In a lot of ways, children and adults react the same. In other ways, and the big difference here to remember is that for children, they just can't articulate it as well as adults. They can experience a lot of the same feelings, the stress-related feelings. Adults and children may react out with physical manifestations. If you've ever had any kind of anxiety or other type of related illness like that, you know that it can manifest itself physically in the body. Okay? It's very real. It's not something that's not real. It's very real. So behavioral changes in behavior, emotions, obviously, even the ability to cognitively think and reason. And when you're under a moment of intense stress, the adrenaline is very high. That's why emergency preparedness is so important. Not just learning the skills and learning what to do if an emergency happens, but practicing it over and over and over again, because if you don't have that muscle memory in that event with the high levels of adrenaline and stress, you may not recall what it is that you're supposed to do. And then, of course, it has definite spiritual impact on you as well. So when are the events more stressful or traumatic? When the event is unexpected. Because when it's something that's is coming, let's talk about for a moment the death of a loved one. If you have a loved one that unfortunately has some type of a chronic illness, it's always hard when you lose a loved one. But if you lose someone young and healthy that tomorrow they have a car accident, it's way more traumatically. Your mind has not had time to process any of that possibility, right? So when a lot of people die, these events are more traumatic. When especially children are involved in that, events are more traumatic. Also, as human beings, we have a desire to know why, don't we? If we don't know why, it makes events even more traumatic to us. When we can't get the answers, and unfortunately, a lot of times that relates to people want to place blame on someone or something for why this happened. There may not be anyone to blame. It may be no one's fault. But for some reason, as human beings, we want to know why. It helps us with our traumatic experience. It helps us cope, to understand. The event is poignant or meaningful. The event impacts a large area. You can minimize negative emotional impact of a disaster through rapid intervention, identification and labeling, and expression of emotions, and regaining a sense of mastery or control over one's life. So the idea behind this is it's important to quickly be there for someone, to listen to them. Don't wait till weeks to are you ready to talk now? I think after 6 weeks, maybe now we can talk about it. No. As quick as possible while they're still experiencing, be there for them, to listen to them. Identifying what emotions they're feeling, helping them identify the fact that is normal. The reason I'm feeling this way, this doesn't make me odd, or there's nothing wrong with me. I experience this trauma, and this is real, and it's normal. And if we know a name for it, let's give it a name, okay? And then that will help us regain some sense of control over our life, or some sense of normalcy. So target outcomes are three things. We want to restore safety, we want to help safeguard, and then sustain through basic needs. Facilitate function by comforting, connecting, and then empowering action by education and resilience. So again, the goal here is to promote safety, calm and comfort, connectedness, and self-empowerment. I talked earlier about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and not to get scientific or anything like that, but just the whole idea behind the fact is, if you really want to help somebody emotionally, spiritually, you first need to meet their physical needs. If I'm starving and I'm bleeding out, I'm not too worried about your God at this moment, just to put it frankly. Help me physically first, feed me, help stop the bleeding, and then let's go from there and let's work up. So we want to help their physiological immediate needs. We want to help give them a sense of safety, the need for love and compassion, social interaction, and the need for self-esteem. They use the word ego here, but it's really about self-esteem. Everyone has self-esteem, empowerment, and then, of course, development and the return to normalcy. So we need to promote safety by meeting basic survival needs. One way we can do that is maybe if we're working in the Family Assistance Center, we're helping provide them information about how we can fix the things missing in their life. You're trying to find your brother? Okay, let me help you. Let's work through the channels and see if we can locate where your brother's at. It's important to shield survivors from onlookers and media. Okay, this is a really big one that a lot of times gets overlooked, and sometimes it's unavoidable, but if at all possible we can shield them from that, it's going to help promote that sense of safety that they need. You're going to have to repeat information. Again, their cognitive ability is impacted. They're experiencing a traumatic event, and you're going to tell them something, 5 minutes later they're going to forget what you said. So repeat, repeat, repeat. Assist them in finding resources. Help them fill out that paperwork. Help them do whatever it is that they need. They're going to be verbalizing to you the things they need the most first. Okay, they're going to be verbalizing that. It may be finding a loved one. It may be a lot of different things. So listen, Don't decide in your mind what you think they need. Listen to what they're telling you that they need, and let's meet those first. So we need to provide calm and comfort, compassionate presence, active listening. So active listening meaning that when you're talking, I'm leaning forward, I'm looking at you, I'm expressing a sense of empathy. I'm showing verbally with my, my body and my expression that I care about what you're saying. I'm repeating back to you what you're saying to me. That's active listening. It's not just sitting there not speaking. It's really showing them with your with your full body language that I care about what you're saying. Don't push them for information. This is one place that law enforcement struggles a lot of times, because they're in the event of a crime scene, and yet the only way sometimes for them to get the information they need is to get it from the victims, right, or the survivors. So, and they understand that, and they're getting better at that as time goes by, but don't push too much.
Brian.
Yes.
If you're with the person and you can read that they are in that stressful mode, but they're not saying anything, do you just, what?
Well, I think the advice there would be to let them be quiet. Be quiet with them. Maybe just sitting with them. I think the key here is to not try and pry anything out of them. Let them do it in their own time. Everybody is different. Not everyone is the exact same. Some people are going to immediately come running out of disaster, want to tell everybody everything that happened to them. They got to get it out. They want you to hear. Other people are going to want to they're going to want to wait a while. And the key here is to just kind of let them guide it. Be a listening ear, and don't pry for any information. Just be there to help them. Let them know that you care about them as a person and you want to help them. Beyond that, you may need to just go away and let them be alone for a little while. And you can, a lot of times I think you can read that in the individual, kind of what they need there. But be flexible and supportive. And sometimes being supportive is not being pushy. Comfort them and console them. Not everybody, by the way, is touchy-feely. We know that. Some people will walk into work and give you a hug, and that's just them saying hello. Other people are like, yeah, I got my personal space. Just give me a nod at the door, and that's all I want. So you kind of got to read people. Some people need that physical touch, putting your arm around them. Other people, just be nearby and be available for them to listen to them if they need that. So what do these people need? They need to talk about their experience, some of them. They all need spiritual care and prayer. And it really is just someone to care about what they're going through. They may want to lean on you. They may want you to show empathy, whether that's you're crying with them or you're just there letting them cry and get it out. And especially active listening. So we talked about active listening already, but just to summarize it again, it's really about body language. You don't have to say anything back, but you can repeat back to them what they're saying to you to show that you're listening. But it's really just, it's showing them with your body that, with your eye contact and your expressions, that you are actively listening to what they're saying. And just having a compassionate presence about you. Try not to interrupt them until they're done. You can ask them questions to clarify what they're telling you. And like I said, occasionally restate what they're saying to show that you're listening. Here's some things to kind of avoid. Avoid asking a lot of why and why not questions, okay? Some disaster situations, depending on what's happened, there may be some level of, especially if it's a man-made event, or there could be some level of shame or guilt that the person's feeling. That's not to say they had anything to do with it at all. But let's say I have a child. Let's say I'm at a sporting event. There's a terroristic event that happens at the sporting event. My son went to the bathroom. Now I can't find my son. Well, why weren't you not watching him? Let's avoid those kinds of things, okay? You mean your 9-year-old went to the bathroom by himself? Let's avoid those things. Don't judge what they're going through, and avoid saying, well, I know how you feel, or I understand, okay? Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to minimize the feelings that they're experiencing. You want to help them realize that they're real, and they're real experiences that they're experiencing. And like I said before, silence is okay. It's fine to just be there with them. That's kind of a creepy picture. Let's not say, let's talk about something else. Or you should work to getting over this. You're strong enough to deal with this. Yeah, we all know resilience. People are very resilient, and in time they can, but in that moment, it's probably not the best thing to say. You'll feel better soon. Well, you did everything you could, and you need to relax. If you're ever in an argument with somebody and they tell you to relax, does that ever work? No, it doesn't. That's the thing about stress. Stress is not always a choice. Sometimes stress is you're experiencing because of what's going on around you. And yeah, you may be able to, by recognizing, you may be able to lower that stress level, but you don't want to minimize what they're going through by just saying, well, just relax. I know the whole world's falling apart around you, but just relax. It's good that you are alive. I mean, yeah, it's good to remind them of the things to be thankful for, but in that moment, it's probably not going to help the situation. And just know that stress reactions are completely normal. People are not going to act the same in a stressful event that they do in everyday life. Understand how people cope with things. Psychological reactions are common and they're very expected. And without saying, let me help you relax, or would you please relax, there are certain things that you can do to help them relax, like just getting them away. If you can get them away from the scene, that's one thing you can do. Stuff like that is kind of techniques that you can help that situation. They may be agitated. Okay, that's one way people cope with stress sometimes. They're agitated, right? I have a big inspection at work, and so I'm just agitated today. Everything people are saying, because I'm just so tense, it's really bothering me. The same way in a traumatic event, there are some people that are going to be agitated. They're going to be upset. They might not want to follow directions. They're maybe lashing out at people. They may even be a little threatening acting. Do not take it personal. They may not necessarily know you. They may know you, but don't take it personal in that moment. This is their reaction to a very uncommon situation, and it does not have anything to do with you. So when should you say, okay, I need to refer this situation to someone else? When they are acting like they may harm themselves or harm others, okay? They can't make any simple decisions whatsoever, so they're basically just locked up, which would include significant withdrawal. And then some people may have hallucinations. They may be paranoid because of that. And they have no idea where they're at or what's going on. They're just completely disoriented with time and place. And of course, if they can't provide any basic care for themselves. So these are times when you want to refer, just realize this is beyond my scope, pray for them, and you can refer them to some other services. So connectedness, we talked about safety, we're talking about connectedness now. It facilitates psychological function through calming and connection. Help the survivors connect with friends and loved ones. There's no better way to feel normal than to be around people that you care about and they care about you, right? It's a lot easier and quicker to heal when you're around people that you're familiar with. If you can, keep survivor families together. Keep them together if any way possible to keep families together in one place, and you definitely want to do that. As quickly as possible, get any children and family or children and parents put back together as quickly as possible. Children need that for resiliency. And so do parents. Parents will be frantic and unable to even function without their children in that kind of an event. And then, of course, connect them to available support services. We want to self-empower them by reestablishing hope and action through education and empowerment. Like I said, as a human being, we all have the desire to know why or to know what's going on. Information is critical to helping people recover. It really is. Just knowing helps. So feel free to clarify any information that may help them solve those immediate concerns. Clarify, repeat, repeat, repeat. And then make sure that their needs are getting met. And help them work toward normal life activities. In communities oftentimes that are ravaged by disaster, one of the first things they try to do as quick as possible is to resume church and school. Church and school, because getting people back into the regular routines of life is the quickest and best way to bring back normalcy in a community. And then, if you can guide them towards what to expect, again, just putting a name on what they're feeling. What you're feeling right now is absolutely normal. And then this teaches resiliency. So what is resiliency? We've been kind of talking about that. It's the ability to accommodate and bounce back after a setback, disappointment, crisis, or a major distress. So it's kind of just bouncing back from the disaster. We also talked about this earlier. Every person that experiences a disaster is touched by that disaster. It doesn't matter if you're a first responder, it doesn't matter if you're a second responder, if you're a victim, everyone is touched by it. We all have the ability to bounce back after any disaster. Don't ever tell people and don't ever expect that you're going to go back to life as normal. Life will never be the same. It will be different, but it can still be good. And I think we talked about that earlier also. So foster resilience. And one goal of psychological first aid is supporting resilience not only in others but also in ourselves. So watching each other. So talking about watching each other when we're deployed, keep an eye on each other. Know your own unique stressors and your own red flags. Some of us, it's when we start feeling exhaustion, we start making poor choices. We know when we get to that point, right? If you're working a lot of shifts at work and you just kind of know, like I work in a hospital. I'm not a clinician, but I work in a hospital, and sometimes I work long shifts, and I work with a lot of people that work 12-hour shifts, or maybe they have to pull a double or whatever that is. We all know when we get to that place where these are my red flags. I'm now making decisions a little differently than I would with plenty of rest and things like that. So just know that keep an eye on that for yourself and for people around you. Emotional pain and anxiety are contagious. Don't allow the emotional stress and the anxiety of the situation to overcome you. You want to be that calmness to the situation. So be cognizant of that. A lot of despair around you and individuals going through a hard time. Don't allow that to come on you. Instead, provide that calmness to the situation. But awareness that is the reality can help with that. Okay, so pre-event, before the disaster, how do we build responder resilience? By education and training. Social support systems are critical. It's very important at all times, if you're deployed into an event and you're working and you're helping the community, it's important, if you can, have a buddy the entire time. Buddy system, I know it's kind of an old thing we've kind of heard. If you're ever in the military, always have your wingman. I'm in the Air Force, so it's wingman. It's battle buddy if you're in the Army, and it goes on and on and on. But have somebody there. Have those social support systems. Look after each other. Instill a sense of mission and purpose. We talked about establishing the mission and vision of the organization before you go out. How can you achieve goals and be effective if you don't keep on with that sense of mission and purpose? Have a family communications plan. Also have a team member communications plan. So how are we going to communicate if the original lines of communication are broken? What's our backup plan? You got to make sure that everything's good at home if you're going to be effective in the field. So before you deploy out, this is the same way with military members, before you deploy out, make sure everything is good in your home. You've got everything planned out, everyone understands what you're going to do. Hopefully, roughly when you'll be back, mommy's okay or daddy's okay, and this is our family communications plan. You know, every other day at 6 p.m. we're going to call, we're going to have a phone conversation or whatever that is. It's going to help you a lot when you're out in the field, knowing that your family is taken care of, and it's going to help your family a lot when you're gone. So during the event, like I said, use the buddy system if possible. Focus on the immediate tasks at hand. It's easy to get very overwhelmed when you're responding to a disaster situation. So focus on what it is that you're doing in that moment. You're providing relief and assistance, and you're making a difference, but don't get overwhelmed by it. Know your own limits, like we talked about, your red flags. Activate your family communications plan whenever you need to. When you start feeling yourself becoming overwhelmed, it's going to center you back to not only pray, but also speak with your family, if you can. That's going to help out. Has anybody heard the term compassion fatigue before? A lot of people that help others as their daily job experience this. So there's a cost to caring. Professionals who are paid to listen to the stories of fear, pain, and suffering of others may feel ourselves similar fear, pain, and suffering because we care. That's called compassion fatigue. It's emotional residue of exposure to working with the suffering, particularly those who are suffering from the consequence of traumatic events. So compassion fatigue is very real. And if you spend much time at all helping these individuals through this traumatic experience, you may experience that yourself. So just be aware of that. So after the event, some delayed reactions are seen among general public and emergency responders. Just trying to get back to normal day life. They'll have episodes of anxiety and things like that can occur. Monitor your own health and well-being, each other as well. Allow yourself time to recover. Everyone recovers at a different speed. Some people do it quickly, some people take longer. And always, always, always seek support if you need to. Don't try to fix yourself by yourself. So, I'm the person that goes in and helps others. So surely I can just pray about it and I'll be okay. Seek help from other people, from your pastor, whoever you can to help you out. Don't assume you can do it by yourself. Expect a reintegration period upon returning to your usual routine. You're not going to come home on Sunday and Monday morning everything's back to normal. Okay, it takes time. And to pay attention to cues from your family that you're becoming too involved, or that your family around you, they know your behavior very well. It's your spouse, your children. So watch for cues. If you're acting differently, you may not notice it, and they may notice it. And that's a sign that I need to go talk to somebody. I need to pray with my pastor, whatever that may be. I think we're coming to a close on this one.